Hello, thank you for watching my channel today. My name is Sarah and my channel is called Your True Shelf. Today I'm recording the video that we all get very excited about on booktube, which is the best books of the year video. I have just recorded this whole video only to find that I had no sound, and so I'm having to record the whole thing again. At least I may have a more polished performance recording the whole thing twice. I was trying to get this down to a top 10 and I've only managed to get it down to a top 12 because I didn't want to get rid of the last two books that are on my list. The book in number one position is definitely my best book of the year by quite a way, but the other books I could slightly swap around the order. As we know, it's a little bit arbitrary doing orders, but this is what I've come up with. The first book that I have chosen on number 12 is a classic, and this is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. This is my first Anne Bronte that I've read. I've only read Charlotte's books before, and I have to say I feel like I'm more of an Anne girl than a Charlotte girl. This is a really beautiful book, which I feel like it's quite ahead of its time. I don't profess to be an expert on classics, and especially classics written in this time period, but I feel that this book is very progressive in its themes. Wildfell Hall has become occupied by a new tenant called Helen, and Helen has come with her young son, and she is very mysterious to the whole community, especially her neighbours, the Markhams, because Gilbert Markham really wants to know what she's all about, and he really wants to get to know her. He has feelings for her. She's very beautiful, and she really wants to keep her life to herself. She doesn't want to particularly interact with the local community. She has, we think, some secrets that she doesn't want to reveal, and the community is starting to gossip about her a lot because they want to know who the father of her child is, who her husband is, what's happened to him, why is she at Wildfell Hall. And they're very nosy. The whole lot of them are very nosy. And Gilbert slowly manages to get some inroads into Helen's life, and they have quite a good friendship. But she keeps trying to put a distance between them and saying, like, this can't go any further. I really can't. And he really wants to know why. So that's what's happening in the first quarter of the book. The middle half of the book is Helen's journals, where we finally learn Helen's story through her own words and learn why she is where she is and what's happened to her. And the themes explored here are ones that I won't delve into the details for because I don't want to give any spoilers, but they're not themes that I've really heard talked about in books written in this time period before. I feel they're very feminist, and I think that Anne Bronte was very brave and influential to write this book at this time period. Then the last quarter of the book is back to Gilbert again, and we find out what happens. And I just thought that it was, whilst it's a very big book, I really thought it was worth the read and just very progressive and much stronger women than I've read in this time period in the past. Number 11 in the list is Mighty Be Our Powers by Lima Gabawi. This is a non-fiction book which I listened to on audio, and she reads the book herself. Lima was born in the 1980s in Liberia, and Liberia is not a country that I was very familiar with, but there was a civil war in Liberia which started as she was just finishing high school, and she was about to go off to university. She had quite a promising future ahead of her, and then the war broke out, and it deeply affected her community but also her family. There were lots of losses, there was a lot of fear, there were devastating things that happened to people that she loved. And then over time she decides that she has to do something to try and stop this from happening, and she works tirelessly in conflict resolution, and she actually ends up winning the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize, which is an incredible achievement. And Lima's strategy is to work with the women in the community, because the men will tend to like blaze up at each other and start killing and raping and doing terrible things to women in the community, and the women need to come together and to put a stop to it, basically. So they train in conflict resolution, and Lima becomes sort of a worldwide expert in this field throughout the book, and about spotting the signs early of a conflict brewing and trying to put things in place to dampen down this sort of smouldering conflict that's happening. And she's an incredible woman. She goes through her own difficulties. She has issues with alcohol at one point. She has abusive relationships. She has a lot of children, and her children have to be raised by other members of the family a lot of the time because she's away working, trying to prevent war. And she talks a lot about that and her relationships. And she meets some incredible people in her lifetime as well. This book is very moving. There's a lot of trauma in it because of the nature of the discussion, but it was really amazing to hear from her point of view and how much she achieved with so little. There was so little resource to achieve what she did that people didn't even have their own desks and writing materials a lot of the time because there wasn't the funding. And yet she did this amazing job, and she is a real hero. So I very much encourage anyone to read her story and learn about the political situation in Liberia, of which I had no idea. Number 10 on the list is a book that I heard about from Sarah at Freshly Read Books, and this is Light Perpetual by Frances Spufford. This was longlisted for the Booker Prize in 2021, but I hadn't come across it before until I saw Sarah talk about it really passionately, and therefore I wanted to read it. I had that lovely situation where I went into a bookshop with the purpose of buying this book. I found it and I started it on the bus home, and I really love buying a book and still reading it while you've got that enthusiasm that you had when you bought it, rather than having it on the shelf for a few years before you pick it up. So that was really fun. And this is a very interesting book because it's set in 1944 at the beginning, which is T=0 time. And we're following 5 children who've gone into a British department store called Woolworths with their parents because there's been a delivery of saucepans, and saucepans apparently were very difficult to get hold of at that time because there wasn't spare metal in wartime Britain. And they've all gone to have a look, and as they're standing there in Woolworths, this in very slow motion in the book, because the author slows time down, this bomb comes slowly through the ceiling of Woolworths and explodes in the area where all of these people are standing, and all 5 children are killed. It's set in a fictional borough called Bexford in London, and what the author does is imagine that these children hadn't died and what their lives would have gone on to become had they not been killed by this bomb. So we meet them again when they're 5, and then we hear from each of the children's perspectives what's going on in their lives at that time. There's 3 boys and 2 girls. And then we meet them every 15 years and we learn what's happening in their lives and where we pick up compared to where they were last time. They're obviously growing up and then they're getting older as we go through the book, and it goes right up to present day. And we get really involved in what's happening, and then we keep remembering to ourselves, oh, actually none of this happened because they died in Woolworths in 1944. And so we see all of the things that never came about, but also all of the children that were never born in their family, and all of the threads that interweave between lives, which are changed by one thing happening, by those people being in that place at that time on that day, and their whole futures are wiped out, but not only their futures, the futures of all the generations to come. And that's really, really moving. And there were also some metaphors for time in this book as well. So different things that happen which make you realise sort of that where the author's playing with time. And I really loved just learning about these characters and feeling for the characters, but then remembering they don't actually exist in the book or outside of the book. And yeah, great idea and really well executed and really worth reading. Book number 9 on my list is The Art of Fielding by Chad Harback. This is an older book, so this was written in 2011, and it had been on my shelves all of that time, and then I chose it for TBR Spin last year, and therefore I ended up reading it, and I'm so glad I did because it's a wonderful book. And yes, it is about baseball, but equally I know nothing about baseball. I'm not interested in it at all, and that didn't tarnish it for me. You don't need to be interested in baseball or know anything about it to love this book. This is written from 5 different perspectives, and it's set on an American college campus. We're following The main guy we're probably following is called Henry Scrimshander, and he is a small, skinny young guy who has an incredible talent for pitching and catching the ball. I don't know if that's the quite correct term in baseball. And because he's so small, people sort of don't take him seriously and don't realise how talented he is. And he's managed to get into this college, but people don't really want him on the team because they think, well, what can he do? He's such a little kid and everything. And so he's taken on by another college student who's a little bit older called Mike, who's also an aspiring baseball star, but he has some injuries. Mike helps Henry with his confidence and his size. He's trying to bulk him up in the gym and train him so that he can fulfill his potential, but really he's doing that at the detriment of Mike's own place in the baseball team, which is an interesting story. We then have a college professor who has feelings for another guy on the baseball team and has never been in a queer relationship before. So there's that story. And then the college professor's daughter is also on the scene, and she is having feelings for Mike, who is the one who's training Henry. So it's all very intertwined, and we end up hearing from all of their perspectives, which is really good. And the writing is just really, really good writing. I thought that I looked to see if he's written any other books, and he hasn't, but he has an online magazine or newspaper. So he's an editor of a journal called N+1, which I hadn't heard of, and he hasn't done any other books, which I'm really annoyed about because they're so good. Jonathan Franzen has blurbed the front, and he says, "It's left a little hole in my life the way a really good book will." And it also got a Sunday Times Book of the Year. So I really like hearing other people talk about books that are backlist books that I don't know anything about, and they really love them. So I hope that other people will go on to pick this up. Like I said, please don't let the baseball thing put you off, because I literally know nothing about baseball, and it didn't matter because it's set around baseball, but baseball's not the main character in this book. And I'd highly recommend this one. Book number 8 is the first in a few of the Women's Prize books, some for fiction, some for non-fiction. And this is a book which I didn't want to read. I had not prioritised it at all. And then I was on a podcast called Bedside Reading, and I was there to talk about the Women's Prize shortlist books. And because this book had been shortlisted, I had to read it. And wow, I'm so glad I did, because I absolutely loved it. And it was River East, River West by Aubrey Lescure. This is a phenomenal book, which I listened to on audio. We're following a dual perspective here. So we have Alva, who is a Chinese American girl who has grown up her whole life in China, but her mum is white American. Her mum has lived there for a really long time and is fluent in Mandarin, and Alva is fluent in both languages. At the start of the book, Alva's mum is marrying her landlord, who's called Lu Fong, and Alva cannot understand why her mum is marrying this guy. She doesn't think they know each other very well. She's like, I don't want him to be my dad. She's never known her biological father before. And she is really unimpressed by the whole thing. Lu Fong is trying to help and trying to form a relationship with her, but she's not really interested. All she wants to do is go to America, because she has this vision of the American dream in her head and what it must be like to be in America. And she wants Lu Fong to pay for her to go to the international school in their locality in China where they live, because she feels like this will bring her closer to other American kids. And when she goes, she realises that she's not seen as American by the American children there, but she's also not really seen as fully Chinese by her Chinese family and community, because she's mixed race. So there's a lot about displacement and belonging in this novel. And we hear Alva's coming of age story, which is really, really well done. Then the other perspective is Lu Fong's perspective. So we go right back to the 1980s, when it's the Cultural Revolution of China. And we learn about how this affected Lu Fong. And we get to know him. We follow him all the way from the 1980s up to the present day. So he goes from this landlord who we don't really know anything about, and we think maybe Alva's mum shouldn't be marrying him because we don't know anything about him, all the way through from his whole life and how his life is intertwined with Alva's mother's life before Alva was even born. So she doesn't even know that they knew each other before, but also all of the things that happened to him in his life to get him to this point. And I ended up feeling a lot of empathy and care for Lu Feng, and also for Alva. And it's an incredibly moving book about getting to know people, how people come into each other's lives, and we don't know quite what connections they're going to have. This coming of age story, and like I said, this displacement that's happened to all of the characters really, but especially to Alva, who feels like she's American but isn't accepted by Americans and doesn't really always want to be Chinese, even though she's always lived in China for her whole life. And so it's a really beautiful novel, and I would highly encourage everyone to pick it up. Number 7 on the list is the second in a series. This is The House of the Golden Door by Elodie Harper, which is book 2 of 3 in the Wolf Den trilogy. I will not talk about what happens in this book because it's going to give spoilers, and I don't want anyone to have spoilers. What I will say is that this book is incredibly tense. There were points where I could hardly bear to carry on going because I was so afraid of what was going to happen, and I really feel like the investment that you have in this book is very high. It's set in 1st century Pompeii, and we're following Amara, who is an enslaved young woman who was enslaved. This is in book 1. She was enslaved after the death of her father, who wasn't there to protect her anymore, and she's being forced to work in a brothel. The pimp of the brothel is called Felix. He's very cruel and very manipulative, but Amara is trying to find ways that she can manipulate him for her own gains because she's very bright and clever. There's the found family that she has with the other slaves who are in the brothel, and the sisterhood that they form with each other through all the trauma that they're going through. But I found that Elodie Harper evokes 1st century Pompeii with incredible clarity, and the sights, smells, sounds, hustle and bustle, the heat, the clothes, the wealth and the poverty, everything makes you feel transported to that period of time. And I think that I love historical fiction, and any historical fiction that can bring me back in time to watch what's happening is going to be a winner for me. You're very invested in what happens to these women and the stories that happen during Amara's time at the Wolf Den, which is the name of the brothel, and it's incredible. I can't recommend it highly enough, and I'm focusing on trying to finish as many of my series as I've got on the go as possible at the moment, so I will shortly be picking up the final book so that I can find out what happens to Amara in the end. The next book, number 6 on the list, is a modern classic which we picked for book club and I think came second in our rankings of all the book club books we read last year. This was my pick, and it is Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner, with a very beautiful, striking cover. I love the cover of this book. This is my first Wallace Stegner. I really want to read more of his work because he can write so well. He's one of those writers that just you admire the craft of what they've created by how well they've done it. This was written in the 80s and it's set earlier than that. It's set I think in the 60s, and it's following the friendship of 2 couples throughout their lives. So we have a couple called Larry and Sally who they've just got married. They don't have much in the way of worldly goods, and Larry's just got a job at the local university, and his wife is pregnant, and they don't have say much money or anything, but they're just starting out in their married life together. And then there's another couple called Charity and Sid who are much more wealthy. Charity has a lot of money and a lot of desire to control her life, shall we say, and they're a really nice couple. And because Charity is then pregnant at the same time, Charity and Sally become friends, and Larry and Sid work together at the university. And it's about how the couple's lives become very intertwined with each other. There's a power imbalance between the 2 friendships because Charity and Sid have so much more than Sally and Larry, and they really want to help them, but if there's then that kind of awkwardness of if a couple will help another couple financially or help them get a leg up, then you sort of feel indebted to them and a little bit awkward at the same time, yet they did it with good faith. And so there are these sort of dynamics going on between them. And when we first meet the characters, it's coming towards the end of their lives, and we know somebody's really sick and that's why they've come together. And we then go back in time and find out what journey they went on as four friends to get to the place they're at now. And this is definitely a book which is more character focused rather than plot focused. So there are plot points in this book, but it's much more the detail of their marriages and their friendships and their lives rather than lots of plot. And we witness their day-to-day existences, their minutiae, the conversations, the arguments, the fun times they have together. We see everything, and because it's written so beautifully, we really feel like we're involved with their lives. And I thought that it was a real masterpiece, this book, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. I got it from one of the table displays in Waterstones a few years ago, and I'm very glad that I did because I really, really loved it. Next, I have Matrescence by Lucy Jones, which was one of the books listed for the inaugural Women's Prize for Non-Fiction list, which happened for the first time in 2024. This book was amazing. I'm just going to tell you what the last bit of the blurb says, but matrescence means a journey into motherhood, so it's the becoming of being a mother. And it says, here is an urgent examination of the modern institution of motherhood, which seeks to unshackle all parents from oppressive social norms. As it deepens our understanding of matrescence, it raises vital questions about motherhood and femininity, interdependence and individual identity, as well as about our relationships with each other and the living world. So this is part memoir and part examination of the psychological, physiological and social changes that happen during pregnancy, birth and motherhood. And Lucy Jones writes this as she is pregnant and having a baby, so her experience of this is very much interwoven. She talks about what it's like from a financial point of view. She's a freelancer, and so she's trying to work as late as she can in her pregnancy. It's very hot. It's very difficult for her. I think she doesn't have a car, so she's using transport, heavily pregnant. She just talks about kind of the practical difficulties, but also she talks a lot about her birth. So I think that if you have had a traumatic birth or you are due to give birth, I wouldn't read this book, because she's very, very open about her birth blow by blow, and I could relate to a lot of what she said. And she talks about what it's like when she has had her baby, and it is a very crazy time when you've just had a baby. Your hormones are all over the place, your body's changed, your life has gone from being your life to you're a minor character in your own life because you have to keep someone else alive and they depend on you for absolutely everything, and you're tortured by sleep deprivation, and it's a very, very difficult time. And she feels that nobody's really being really honest about all of the feelings and things that are happening to us after we've had a baby. And I felt this was so honest, and I really appreciate that honesty, because I felt like when I just had my first baby, there wasn't much honesty around how bad the hard parts were. And there's all this amazing stuff, obviously. You've just had a baby who you love more than anything else in the world, but there's also a lot of really, really hard parts which I don't think are covered very much in life. And I really appreciated and respected the honesty that she told this with, and how she wove in all of the kind of science and psychology and fascinating physiology and everything that comes in to it, not just her own story. So really, really brilliant. And if this is something that you think you'd be interested in, I don't think it should just be women or people who've had children who are reading this book, because I remember when people were talking about it, there were guys and there were people who hadn't got children for whatever reason who'd read this and really appreciated it as well. So I don't think it's just for people who've had kids or just for women. Book number 4 is another one from the Women's Prize non-fiction list, and I was so gutted this didn't win because I loved it so much, and it was How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. This is Sophia's memoir of what it was like growing up in Jamaica and growing up as part of a Rastafari family. So she was born around the same time as me in the 80s, and I could get I love when cultural references line up from when she was that age, when I was that age. And it was a very difficult childhood for her because she had several younger siblings. She had a dad whose word was absolute authority. The Rastafari in this book are often treated badly and looked down upon by other members of the communities in Jamaica and also by the white settlers in Jamaica as well. And there are stories that are told about Rastafari and how they eat children and those kind of things, which obviously they don't. But they're looked down upon as sort of second-class citizens in Jamaica in this book, in her perspective of this. And her dad is anything that her dad sees as sort of Western or evil in his eyes is referred to as Babylon, and he's trying to protect his family from Babylon, but at the same time he's driving this huge wedge in the family because he wants to control everything, his wife and all his children, and he doesn't want them to do anything that's considered to be outside of Rastafari culture. And it gets more and more extreme. So things that you see initially as you can understand why those are ideals, why people have these ideals, have then got much more extreme and become much more oppressive. And I don't know enough about the Rastafari sect of Jamaica to know whether these views that her dad has are representative of lots of Rastafari views or whether they're much more extreme than lots of Rastafari are in Jamaica. I don't know the answer to that question, so I don't want to sound like I'm giving a judgment on that community. But he makes their life very difficult for their family, and the mum is amazing. She's such a lovely woman, and she is very strong, and she is putting up with this very controlling marriage, but also she is teaching the children their education, and she's a big believer in education, and she's trying to get them to study and learn as much as they can, which is their power really. And it's Sophia's way of escaping because she really wants to leave Jamaica. She wants to go to America. She wants to get away from her dad, and what she wants to do is be a poet, which she actually is a poet now. And she achieves incredible things considering like how difficult her life was. She's really achieved some incredible things, and because she's a poet, she writes this insanely well. It's so beautiful, her writing, and she reads the audio herself, so I'd also really recommend listening to her reading it because she does a great job of that as well. And so it's her story and her difficult relationship with her dad, because she does love her dad but he's awful to her a lot of the time. Book number 3 is a book that I've only just finished, and it was recommended to me by a friend at work, and he was right. I really did love it, and it is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. I've lent this to my mum at the moment, so I'll insert a picture in the corner. This book is set in early 1900s, and it's about the group of people who make the first Oxford English dictionaries. So this took decades to do, and some of the characters are real. So for instance, Dr. Murray, it was the editor-in-chief of the Oxford English Dictionary, and he is a character in this book. And so were his children, and some of the other people who worked on the dictionary were real people. The main character we're following is a girl called Esme, and she is being raised by her dad because her mum died, I think when she was being born or shortly after she was born. So her dad is trying to raise her, and her dad is also working at the scriptorium, which is essentially a huge shed where they're making the English dictionary, and it's referred to as the Scrippy. And there are all these hundreds and hundreds of pigeonholes where the words are stored and somebody will write in, so volunteers wrote into the Oxford English Dictionary with the word that they wanted in the dictionary, and then the scholars would try and find quotations from texts to define the word, and they would have all these slips with all the words and the quotations and the definitions ready to form into dictionary segments. And one day Esme finds under the table a word called bondmaid, which is basically a woman who is enslaved or bonded to a master, and she takes this word and she steals it, and it's the first in her dictionary of lost words. So sometimes she takes words, and as she gets older, she realises that the words that are being included in the dictionary are words by white male academics, and they're not necessarily the words that people are using in the community. So women are using different words, poorer people are using different words. There's words which have sort of slang meanings and things like that which aren't going to make it into the dictionary, yet they're in commonplace. And she wants to start collecting these words on her own slips and storing them, because she feels like they're really important and they shouldn't be lost because they're not used in scholarly articles. So we follow Esme growing up. She often sits under the table in the Scrippy because her dad is trying to work there as well as to raise her. She has a servant called Lizzie who's slightly older than her, who is like a mother figure to her, and we love Lizzie as much as we love her dad and Esme. World War One is coming closer and closer, and that's going to have an impact on the people in this book as well. And I couldn't wait to pick this book up again. Every time I put it down, I really couldn't wait to start reading it again, because I really felt deeply for the characters. They really found a place into my heart, and I think they're the books that we remember when we love the characters. And Esme and her story really found a place in my heart. And I also just found it really fascinating about how the dictionary was formed. And there was a book on the Women's Prize for Non-Fictionists that I didn't read called The Dictionary People by Sarah Ogilvie. And it was about the unsung heroes of the first dictionary. And I would like to read that now, because I feel like it would fit really nicely with having just read The Dictionary of Lost Words. It's also about women's suffrage and about class and activism and things as well. So it's got a lot to it, and I really just loved it. So now we're down to our top two. The second book, number 2 on the list, is Night Bloom by Peace Adzo Medea, which was also a Women's Prize book. And haven't they done well getting so many books on my list? I was really this really kind of reinforces to me actually how much I love the Women's Prize. This one is a book from 2 perspectives. We are following 2 cousins, Akorfa and Selassie. They're young girls, they're more like sisters than cousins, and they're growing up in Ghana. And as the book progresses slightly into it, Selassie's mum dies, and we're hearing from Akorfa, whose parents are very keen on her doing well in her education. They want her to go and be a doctor, they want her to study abroad, and they're very supportive. They have plenty of money, and Selassie has been left now without a mum in a less well-off family, and we're told that Selassie's going off the rails and she's not being the girl that they thought she would be. And so Akorfa and Selassie start diverging in their paths, and Akorfa sort of starts looking down on Selassie. Akorfa's mum is fed up with her. She feels that she's not grateful for all the help they're giving her, and they just drift apart as they get older. And we follow Akorfa and what she's doing. And then halfway through the book, we start again, but this time we follow Selassie instead of Akorfa, and everything we thought we knew is spun on its head. And I just thought it was so clever how it just shows how 2 people can go through the same family story, yet one person thinks this happened and one person thinks this happened, and they're both convinced that they're right, and we get the overarching view of both. And this isn't a spoiler, but coming towards the end of the book, we will get the girls as adult women will come back together, and we'll figure out what happened and where everything went wrong and why. And I just loved hearing about the Ghanaian culture, about the family situation, the family dynamics, family politics, the living situations, the financial stuff with the families and how that worked, the education system, the class system, the judgments, all of the things that I really found fascinating about this family in Ghana, and also how things that happen in childhood are such formative experiences as people get older, and how it can change so much. And I not only loved the writing, but again, Selassie and Akorfa really got in here and stayed there, and I cared what was happening to them. I really wasn't expecting everything that happened, and I just found it very, very well done, very readable, very beautiful, and an excellent reading experience. So book number 1, this was an easy decision for me. I knew that nothing was going to beat this book. There's actually 2 because it's a series, the first 2 in a quartet that I've read this year, and I have buddy read them with Aaron from Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book, and this is the Boudica series by Amanda Scott. This is the first book, which is called Dreaming the Eagle, and this is the second book, which is called Dreaming the Bull, and I got the third book, Dreaming the Hound, for Christmas. So I'm going to put book 2 down because I just want to hold up one book ideally. I love historical fiction, as I've already said, especially ancient history, and this was set in the 1st century AD, so not ancient, but 2,000 years ago. Growing up in Colchester, I was very aware of Boudica because she was legendary in Colchester, because the Iceni tribe where she was from, where they were more like in the sort of Norfolk area, funnily enough where I am now, and Camladunum, as Colchester was known, was a key site in this time period, and therefore growing up in that place I very much heard about the history of the area. So when I actually heard Louise Savage talking about this book first, and I thought, oh yeah, I really want to read this, and Aaron really wanted to read it too, so we decided to read it together, and it's just become so much to me. Like, I can't explain how much these books mean to me. We are following Boudica. She gets her first kill at 12 when another tribe invades her space, and her mum is killed while she's pregnant, and Boudica kills somebody at that time, and then her warrior's journey begins. And in the Iceni tribe, women are warriors as much as men are. It's not just men who are warriors. And the main sort of 2 paths in this community are either as warriors or as dreamers. The dreamers are deeply sort of spiritual people who communicate with their ancestors after they've died. They have lots of ceremony. They're very respectful of their gods, and they see a lot of premonitions of what they should do and what's going to happen in their dreams, and they communicate them with the community, and the community base their decisions on what the dreamers think and dream of. This is explored a lot in the book, and I love all the mysticism is just fantastic. There's a lot of battles, and she writes battles like so well. They're so gripping, the battles that she writes. There is definitely violence in the battles, obviously, because they were violent, yet it's not gratuitous violence, and we care so much about all the characters in this book, all of the family of Boudica and the important people in the Iceni tribe that we get to know. We care deeply for them and their animals, not just the people. The animals are characters in this book as well. And this is pre-Roman Britain, and when we move on to book 2, it's come to the time period where the Romans have invaded Britain, and so that there are parts of that book which are set in Rome. It very much is a hugely different place, Rome and Britain. There's so many differences, and the time of the Romans is set at the same time as the Wolf Den, and you don't feel like you're in the same time period when you compare Rome and Britain, because they're so different. And Amanda Scott just weaves them together seamlessly. The pacing is flawless in this book. There are times where we're just learning what's happening, and there's times when there's huge battles, and there's times when it jumps a few years, but never do we feel like she's done the wrong thing in terms of the pacing of the book. And if you want to know what it was like living in these times, this is the right place to come, because it's so evocative. I'm so passionate about these books. I don't know how much I'm getting across about the books themselves. All I can just say is they're so good, and I just can't wait for more people to pick them up. I think if you've got any interest in history of this time period, or you want to know about Roman Britain, or you want to know about what Britain was like pre-Roman invasion, or you just want to know about mysticism and culture at this time period, just read them, because they are big books. So they're like sort of 700 pages each, but so worth the effort. And as soon as I read this, I was like, this is 100% nothing's going to beat this year. And I feel the same about book 2. Book 3 and book 4 will follow imminently. So I don't feel like I can necessarily have them as my favourite books next year, because it seems like they've already taken my spot this year, but it will be hard to find anything that will beat these. So that's it. That is my best books of the year, and I'd really love to hear if you read any of them, or if you've made a video talking about your best books of the year, so that I can explore other people's lists. If you have thought, oh, I want to pick that up as a result of me talking about any of these books, I'd also really love to hear about that. I hope you're having a really lovely festive period, and I will be back soon with another video. Bye!